Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's game.
In sports, you're either a winner or a loser at the end of the day. But what happens when players cheat their way to the top or let money and fame influence their performance? Is it really competition if the result is already known before? Sure, the good guys get the glory and the fame, but what about the ones that lose their way on the journey? Let's talk about it. I'm Matt Johnson, and this is Game Changers and Rule Breakers, the podcast. Welcome into episode 4 of the Game Changers and Rule Breakers podcast. And on this week's episode, we are heading back to baseball. We're moving on to a newer player, a player who may have done worse things than Pete Rose in my eyes. Barry Bonds, the home run king, on the podcast today. Now, Barry Bonds is a very, very controversial baseball player. Some people consider him the best to ever play the game. Some people consider him a cheater and a liar and someone who has no place in the game of baseball at all. But which one was he? Let's take a deep dive into who Barry Bonds really is. Barry Bonds was born in Riverside, California, to Patricia and Bobby Bonds in 1964. Barry's father, Bobby, was actually a former Major League player himself, spending most of his career with the San Francisco Giants. Barry attended Junipero Serra High School in San Mateo, California, starring in baseball, basketball, and football. Everyone knew from an early age that Barry was going to grow up to be something special, just based on his athletic ability in high school. Case in point, Bonds batted a .467 batting average his senior year of high school. Now, if anyone out there listened to my Pete Rose episode, you'll understand that batting a .467 is pretty damn impressive. So much so that it led to Bonds being drafted in the second round of the 1982 MLB draft to his father's former team, the San Francisco Giants. However, Bonds and the Giants were unable to agree on contract terms, as the Giants offered him $70,000 and Bonds wanted $75,000. So instead of going pro straight out of high school, Bonds made the decision to further his education and head down to Arizona and play on the Arizona State University baseball team. He found continued success in the desert, hitting .347 with 45 home runs and 175 RBIs. Over his college career, he was named an All-American and tied the NCAA record with 7 consecutive hits in the College World Series as a sophomore. Now, Bonds' success on the field was counteracted by his persona off the field, and in the eyes of many of his teammates at ASU, he was not a fun person to be around. His college coach, longtime ASU coach Jim Barak, called him rude, inconsiderate, and self-centered. Bonds was once suspended for breaking curfew, and his teammates actually voted against him returning to the team, even though he was so much better than all of them, which says a lot to me. If you don't have the faith of your teammates, and you don't have the support of your coaches and organizations, even when you're the best player on the field, that should be a red flag to anybody. Bonds was unfazed by this and went on to become the 6th overall pick of the 1985 MLB draft. And his success just kept going up from there. As top draft picks traditionally do, Bonds was coming into a not ideal situation in the Pittsburgh Pirates. Their attendance was drastically low, below 10,000 in 1985 actually, and many of their players were put on trial in 1985 due to their cocaine usage. Asking a 6th overall pick fresh out of college to come into your franchise and fix all of its troubles may seem impossible. But Barry Bonds tended to do the impossible, and he proved people wrong. Bonds made his Major League debut on May 30th, 1986, playing center field. He had a strong rookie season, finishing 6th in Rookie of the Year voting and establishing his reputation as one of the league's best power hitters. Bonds had a tendency to hit lots of homers, hitting 25 home runs in 1987, 24 in 1988, and 19 in 1989. All through these 3 seasons, Pirates' attendance skyrocketed due to the success of their young player. Fans finally felt hope for the franchise again. So much so that they actually set the club attendance record of 52,119 in the 1987 season. And the hype was real. Bonds won MVP of the entire league in 1990 after hitting .301 with 33 homers and 114 RBIs. He helped lead Pittsburgh back to the postseason for the first time since 1979, which is a really, really big deal to the Pittsburgh faithful. However, the Pirates were eliminated in the NLCS that year, and Bonds' time in Pittsburgh was soon to be over. After losing yet again in the NLCS in 1992, Bonds left the Pirates in free agency to sign a record contract with his father's old team, the San Francisco Giants. Barry Bonds was coming home, back to California, back to where his dad played, and getting a fresh start after leaving Pittsburgh on not so good terms. A local paper at the time actually gave him an award. Contrary to winning the MVP of the league, he was awarded the MDP, Most Despised Pirate. If that doesn't tell you anything about how Bonds was perceived during his time in Pittsburgh, then I don't know what will. Regardless, Bonds signed a $43.75 million contract, a record at the time, and picked up where he left off in San Francisco, hitting .336 in 1993. Yet again, winning the MVP. Bonds continued his dominance throughout the 90s, culminating in his historic 1996 season. He became the first National League player and second Major League player of all time to hit 40 home runs and steal 40 bases in the same season, joining Jose Canseco. This is really interesting to me because when I think of baseball players who can hit home runs and who can steal bases consistently, there's not a whole lot. I think of stealing bases, I think of like a Ricky Henderson type, like a fast, small guy you can throw on the base path and he'll get you where you want to go, versus your typical DH, swinging out of the park but not really that athletic. I wasn't alive for Barry Bonds' feats in the 90s. Maybe he would prove me wrong if I was there to see it. The history didn't stop there though. Bonds hit his 300th career home run on April 27, 1996, and joined the 300 club in stolen bases and home runs for a career. Throughout the rest of the decade, Bonds continued his dominance. So much so that the Diamondbacks, on May 28, 1998, actually walked him on purpose with the bases loaded. Now you are willingly giving up a run because you think that Barry Bonds, who's at the plate, is going to drive in 2, 3, maybe even 4 runs. That is a bold strategy. And that just shows the respect that Bonds as a hitter had gained from the rest of the league. Bonds looked to move into the 2000s and keep his status as one of the top players in baseball. As good as Bonds was in the 90s, he seemed to get even better in the 2000s. Athletes getting better with age isn't normal sometimes. Keep that in mind. But to on-the-field stuff, in the 2001 season, Bonds hit 28 home runs in the Giants' first 50 games, including his 500th career home run on April 17th. On this pace, Bonds was set to break the home run record of Mark McGwire, set in 1998. He needed 70. He was already at 28 through the first 50. Did he get there? It's Barry Bonds. Of course he got there. 73 home runs in 2001 in 162 games. Major league record .863 slugging percentage. He was hitting the ball as far as anyone could hit it and doing it with a frequency that was just amazing to see. This earned him a 5-year, $90 million contract with the Giants in 2002. And the contract proved to be worth it, as the Giants reached the 2002 World Series, losing 4-3 to the then Anaheim Angels. Now, for Bonds to be playing at a high level this late in his career was unheard of, and he was reaching record-breaking territory. In the 2004 season, Bonds hit .362 for the entire season. That's crazy. You don't see that ever happening. Bonds hit his 700th career home run on September 17, 2004, and struck out just 41 times during the season. He actually hit more home runs than he did strikeouts, as he had 45 that year. And he was doing all of this at 40 years old. And speaking of record-breaking, there's no better definition of record-breaking in baseball than Barry Bonds' 2006 season. In his 21st season playing professional baseball, Barry Bonds made history in 2006. On May 28th, Bonds hit his 715th career home run, passing Babe Ruth for second all-time. But he didn't stop there. On September 22nd of that year, Bonds tied the legendary Hank Aaron's National League career home run record with 733. Keep in mind, he was doing this at 41 years old. However, allegations were starting to come out that Bonds may have been juicing, may have been using steroids, and in January 2007, Bonds failed a drug test for amphetamines. Not steroids, plain old amphetamines, as normal as I can make that sound. The Giants re-signed Bonds for the 2007 season as he approached the all-time home run record held by Hank Aaron. Aaron accrued 755 home runs in his career, a number which many thought was impossible to pass. However, Bonds, as he tended to do during his career, made the impossible happen. On August 7th, 2007, Bonds hit a 435-foot home run in San Francisco to break the all-time record. He had made history. He had done what no one else before him had did. He was, in some people's eyes, the greatest baseball player of all time. As it turns out, his record-setting 2007 season would also be his last, as he was not re-signed by the Giants for 2008 and had not played anywhere since then. Bonds was clearly great on the field, but there were allegations coming up that behind the scenes, everything was not right. Have you ever seen a cartoon of a baseball player? He steps up to the plate, his gigantic arm muscles. He swings the bat, the ball goes flying far, far away, and you can't even see it again. Makes it look so easy. Well, during the steroid scandal that plagued MLB in the late 1990s and early 2000s, that's how players kind of looked. Steroids are not something to mess around with. I mean, they obviously work, but at what cost? Bonds' late career success had some people wondering, was he on the juice? Officially, he wasn't. If you do your own investigation, you might uncover a different conclusion. This all ties back to a business in the San Francisco area called BALCO, Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative. Balco supplied anabolic steroids to professional athletes and was under investigation for this by the US government in 2002. Some of the drugs distributed by this business included HGH, otherwise known as human growth hormone, which is shown to build muscle mass, testosterone cream, and THG. All of these drugs worked to trim body fat and build muscle. THG in particular looked to get around normal drug tests, such as those required by MLB. Other athletes caught up in this included Jason Giambi, Marion Jones, and Bill Romanowski, but Bonds was the most famous and the most successful. It should be pointed out that Barry Bonds has never failed a drug test for the steroids, has never been caught using steroids explicitly, and has never admitted any wrongdoing in his career or playing days. However, if you look, the evidence is pretty hard to ignore. Bonds' personal trainer, Greg Anderson, refused to testify against Bonds in his perjury trial for lying about his alleged steroid use. Anderson was actually sentenced to jail over this. So in my eyes, if you're using steroids in MLB, it's pretty easy to get a fall guy, say your personal trainer, have him do some time for you. Is there a chance he might see some money come his way after he gets out? I would say there's a pretty high chance given what Bonds was making. Again, this is just my take, not speaking on what actually happened, but I could really see it. There's no other way this makes sense to me. Even though Bonds has never officially been charged with steroid use or found guilty by MLB for doing anything doping related, it has had a powerful impact on his reputation. Bonds was once a lock for the Baseball Hall of Fame. I mean, the career leader in home runs, you gotta put him in there. However, in his 10 years on the Hall of Fame ballot, he never made the 75% share of the votes required for induction. In his last year, in 2022, Bonds peaked at 66% and fell off the ballot for the Hall of Fame. Turns out that voters might have some ethics here, willing to look past a legendary career because of the drugs that might have fueled that legendary career. And if the voters have ethics, let's see where my ethics lie. It's that time of the show where, as I always do, I break down whether the subject is a game changer or a rule breaker. And with Barry Bonds, there's a lot of evidence for both sides. So let's take a look here. Was he a game changer? Absolutely. You think of baseball, you think of home runs, you think of one of the most iconic players to ever play the game. You can be sure Barry Bonds' name is coming up in that list. I mean, the man was being intentionally walked. Opposing teams were too scared to pitch him the ball. That is a high level of respect that only the best to ever play baseball can get around the league. Bonds played 22 years in MLB. Longevity, unquestioned. Bonds holds the record for most career home runs, most home runs in a single season. Accomplishments, unquestioned. Bonds is the only player to have at least 500 home runs and 500 stolen bases. Ultimate legacy, unquestioned. Barry Bonds, in my eyes, is one of the best players to ever play the game of baseball. Very, very hard to argue that. But was his success entirely his? No, I don't think it was. Even though there was no concrete evidence that Bonds officially used steroids, and he has never admitted it, it is pretty clear to me that he knew what he was doing, and being brought up on perjury charges for not admitting his involvement in the Balco scandal, that's basically an admission of guilt to anyone that can understand that type of talk. Add to the fact that he was not a fun person to work with or just to be around at all. He's kind of surly, kind of standoffish, even got into it with the reporters in the dugouts. And it adds up to a man who had great success, but really didn't deserve it. If you have to use drugs to cheat in a game just to prove that you are the best, when you're already good on your own, I just don't see the point. In baseball, much as I said in the Pete Rose episode, there comes a line in which you're damaging the integrity of the game. A game that has been around for over 100 years. It's America's pastime. Kids grow up watching you. Kids idolize you. They want to be like you if you're successful, if you're an MVP, if you lead the league in home runs. And when those kids find out that you use steroids, you use HGH, you use THG, testosterone, to get to where you are, those kids are going to realize that they have been living a lie. And that is not something that you want on your conscience. So, one, if I'm Barry Bonds, I would just fess up and admit I use steroids. And two, I just would not have done that in the first place. So the final verdict, I think you probably already know it, but I'm giving Barry Bonds the rule breaker label because he broke a big rule in baseball. Don't cheat your way to success. You can set all the records you want, but none of those records mean anything if you don't do it legitimately. And the Hall of Fame voters agreed with me. Thank goodness. We'll see if Barry ever admits to it, but I sincerely doubt it. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Game Changers and Rule Breakers. Tune in next time to see the next controversial athlete that I'll discuss on here. Did they beat the allegations? Are they a game changer? Or did their reputation go down with them? Are they a rule breaker? We've done baseball and football so far. Maybe we'll branch out next time. I can't tell you, you just have to listen. I'm Matt Johnson, and this has been Game Changers and Rule Breakers, the podcast.